I'd like to do now is introduce our panel, have them maybe kind of walk up, and we'll start a conversation with you about sort of what are the nuts and bolts in terms of implementing these strategies on your campuses. And then all these folks, of course, you'll be with all day today, but you'll get a little advertisement about what they're doing, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion on some of these topics, and we absolutely want to open it up for a dialogue with you today. So let me introduce our panel. To my immediate right is Casey Sachs, who's with the Colorado Community College System. Colorado has implemented a statewide reform to remedial education that she spearheaded that has now resulted in a system where all students have the opportunity to complete their gateway courses within one academic year, and she'll tell you a little bit more about how they've done that. Next to her is Loretta Griffey from Austin Peay State University. Loretta is a math faculty member at Austin Peay State University, but now is the director for their Center for Teaching and Learning. She has been at the center of their reforms. You saw some of the data in terms of the results that they've achieved by shifting to a single semester co-requisite model at their institution. Shauna Van from Front Range Community College is an innovator in the space of remedial English and reading and has done some amazing work at Front Range in terms of providing writing and reading instruction while students are enrolled in gateway college-level courses like history and other types of college-level courses that are gateways into different programs of study. And then at the end, Heidi Estrom from Boise State University, who has also done some amazing work implementing and adapting the Accelerated Learning Project model at Boise State University, and has also done some very interesting things in assessment and placement to be able to provide students choices and options for what the kind of support that they can receive as they enroll in gateway college courses. So they've all done some very interesting things around remedial education. So what I want to do first is start with Casey. And Casey, can you just for a few minutes tell us a little bit, just very briefly, people will get to learn much more depth later on, but just very briefly talk a little bit about sort of the context in Colorado, how it was that you came to the point where you needed to make some reforms in remedial education, and sort of what you did there in Colorado.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us. So in Colorado, 3 years ago now, our governor went to a Complete College America event and said, we can fix this remediation thing, we'll just run legislation. And my provost at the time said, please don't do that. Please give us at least an opportunity to bring faculty together and to have some real conversations and see if we can solve this ourselves. And if it's still a problem, then run your legislation. But can we buy ourselves some time? And so he's pretty reasonable. He used to be a college president and really actually understands our context and said, yeah, okay, you can have 18 months, and at the end of 18 months, if you can fix this remediation thing, then great, and if you can't, then we'll run legislation. And that was a really great context for us, because what it did was it provided us enough time to actually have some real conversations, and it also provided us some context where we had to say, we actually have to do something, because if we don't, we're not probably going to like what the outcome is. And so we have 15 community colleges in the state of Colorado. We talked to all of the presidents and said, please send us your thought experts in this space. So we got reading, English, math faculty, student services experts, vice presidents, deans. We had a lot of folks who started coming together once a month and spent 18 months really studying remediation and studying what happens in other states. We actually brought in a couple folks from Kentucky to find out what was going on here. And we wanted to look at innovations that were happening at other colleges and other places, people who had good data, people who could talk to us about what they were doing that was really successful for students. And then our goal was to say, how do we turn this into statewide policy and structure that'll work for us and that'll work for both urban and rural institutions, which was maybe one of our largest challenges as a group, because that's where we see a divide in terms of what colleges can really do and the kinds of access that students have, and what is possible at an urban institution may not be possible at some of our rurals. And so it was it was great. They met every month, they did homework, they read articles about what the data were, what the outcomes were really looking like in other places, and kind of came together around combining reading and English into a single discipline for developmental students, to looking at math pathways around, similar to what the Dana Center work says, around algebra pathways, non-algebra pathways, pathways for students who aren't going into transfer degree programs, and really dramatically changed what developmental education looks like for students in our state.
So Casey, tell me a little bit about, the model that you've designed essentially is what, no more than 1 semester remediation plus opportunities for a co-requisite after that. So it's a very specific strategy that all of your campuses need to sort of fit their models within. How was it that you got a bunch of faculty to sort of agree to sort of that specific structure? Like, how was it that they found that they were able to release their thinking that they needed multiple semesters in order to prepare these students and to work within that? I'm sure Shauna has an opinion about that as well.
I'm sure she does. Shauna's one of the faculty members who was on our committee. So in reflecting on it, I would say that some of it was time, some of it was exposure to the best ideas, that if we had taken a vote in that even in the first 3 months that we were working together, people would have stormed the Bastille and left the room and cut my head off. Truly. And I think that it really was a matter of building trust in that group and having people come to a point where they could respect each other enough to actually hear what other folks had to say and to really hear how that was going to impact other campuses and other people. And we even got to a point probably 6-7 months into our process where we were having some really honest conversations that went like this. What you guys are saying makes great sense in theory. Maybe students should be in co-requisite classes, but the way my college has chosen to structure my division, this could mean jobs for my colleagues. And so I'm not sure that I can vote for this, even if it's in the best interests of students, because I don't want to set up a structure where people are risking their jobs. And that was a really honest conversation, and not a conversation that you have with a stranger, and not a conversation that you have lightly. And I think that can only happen in the context of a space where you trust each other and you really can work through what does that mean and what is that going to look like on my campus and can we model it. And it was a lot of different pieces. So for some math faculty, the modeling was great, and it was like, okay, let's look at enrollment projections and let's look at what this is going to mean and where will your enrollment be, and if we... some really elaborate modeling, and that was good for that particular group. I did the same thing for reading English and had a reading faculty member be like, that's nice, Casey, I'm sure it's fine. I don't care what that says. And so I think it was about using different strategies for different groups of people to really be able to talk through what was going to produce the best results for us, but what also was going to produce the best results for the people in the room. Because part of our reality with shared governance is that faculty members get to make these decisions, and sometimes these decisions aren't in our best interest. They're in the best interest of students. And so that's a really hard thing to be able to do, and not something that we could expect people to do overnight by any stretch of the imagination. It really was about how do we work through what the best strategies are and have that make sense for our entire context, not just for one population.
Great. Thanks, Casey. So Loretta, tell us a little bit about the Structured Assistance Program at Austin Peay State University, what you've been able to accomplish there.
Sure. Some of you may be familiar with Austin Peay State University. We're right on the Tennessee-Kentucky border. I think we both claim Fort Campbell and the 101st Airborne. And actually, one of your community colleges is our largest feeder school in terms of community college graduates coming to our institution. So Hopkinsville is our largest community college group on our campus. So I'm a little bit familiar with Kentucky, and in fact, for a while I directed our developmental studies program at the Fort Campbell campus. So I was literally across the hallway from Kentucky. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you a little bit about how things are going at Austin Peay. We did a very dramatic change about 6 years ago in how we address our developmental studies students. In fact, that's a terminology that we no longer use on our campus. We don't have developmental studies students, we have students. We moved very dramatically from a very traditional model, centralized, reading, English, mathematics, and we moved into in a decentralized model, and our students enrolled in the gateway courses with support. And what that support looks like is a required lab. We all know students don't do optional, so don't structure options. You have to structure requirements. So we have a required lab that our students that need some support are required to participate in. That lab is designed to help them pass the course as well as work on some skills that they need that in a just-in-time way. Some of them are algebraic, some of them are simply study skills, some of them are attitudes and actions that they need to be successful in a gateway course. So that lab has a couple of different things that happen. So that lab is simply more time on task for students who need it, when they need it, with the goal of those students getting through their core mathematics course. Now, that being said, our core mathematics courses are very aligned with students' intended outcomes and destinations. Where does the student want to go? So we listen to the student first. What do you want to do? What is your major? And let's help you get to that point. So our entire developmental, even though we don't use that word, our entire developmental approach at this point is student-centered and student-based. It's based on where the student wants to go and how do we as an institution help them get there. It was not an easy thing to do. I will be very honest with you. It was not easy to completely and totally eliminate one system that was well entrenched and actually really a part of the culture of the institution and eliminate that and move to a different model. I'll talk a little bit this afternoon, if you all come and visit with me, perhaps about some of those stumbling blocks and some of the difficulties and the reason why we didn't pilot. We didn't pilot anything. We looked at what was happening in developmental ed. We wanted to know what is our measure of success, and we got really complicated. We developed a lot of logic models and lots of ways we could measure success. I mean, it would take an entire team of statisticians to help us do this, and we finally backed off and realized, okay, we will be successful if our students are earning core credit in their math course that's appropriate for their major. So we backed off from something that was very complicated and from a statistician's point of view, very lovely, but labor-intensive and not realistic. And so we look at it from a very simple perspective at this point. Are our students gaining credit for the math course they need in order to be successful in the major they choose? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. You saw the numbers. Bruce had some numbers up there for us. It's a dramatic change. It is a dramatic change. When we looked at the numbers on the first column, they're embarrassing. You know, when you take that very simple measure, when we let go of our gigantic logic model and you take the very simple measure of gaining core credit, 8% and 11% is failure. We were failing our students in a big way. So we didn't see the need to pilot, because why do we need a pilot? We were already failing. We were at the bottom of the barrel, so we might as well give it a good go. So that was our philosophy in restructuring our developmental studies. It was scary. It was at times contentious. Folks had to think very differently, and professions look very differently, not only for our developmental professional faculty, but also for our core faculty. The entire campus had a change of heart in how we do things. Now, 6 years down the road, we're starting our 6th year into this, I can tell you that it is spread to other areas. We have other academic areas that were not traditionally developmental studies saying, how do I get in this game? How do I identify my students that are at risk, and how do I get into this game? So we've now taken this model that really was designed for mathematics, English, and reading, and we've now expanded to chemistry and biology and some of our other courses that are riddled with a lot of at-risk students, and adopted this type of model to move them then towards success and what the students want to do. So I look forward to visiting with you this afternoon. I will tell you everything I know. You can ask me all kinds of questions. I'll be honest with you. I will tell you the things that work and the things that didn't work. I'll also share, if we had to do it again, what would I suggest? Because we learned a lot of lessons along the way. Our co-requisite model is scaling up to a state level starting this year. There are multiple ways to approach a co-requisite model, but all of our institutions in the Tennessee Board of Regents system will be utilizing a co-requisite model for developmental education. So we'll have larger results coming soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Loretta. So help me understand sort of this notion of teaching the support and providing that support while they're in the college level course. I mean, there's this notion that, if I don't understand these things first, how can I then proceed into the college level course? Talk to me more about how that's impacted instruction and support for students in gateway courses on your college campus.
Sure, I'll be happy to. The first thing you have to do is shake loose preconceived notions on what students need to know. And you actually have to start with what are they majoring in, back into the mathematics course, and then back into the support that they need in order to be successful in that path. So the way the support, our structured learning support is put together is it is very linked with the curriculum in the gateway course. In fact, the structured support is developed in conjunction with the mathematics faculty that are teaching the gateway course. So it is not an independent entity at all. It is scaffolded and it is linked with the actual learning outcomes, for example, in statistics. The statistics course has a lot of things that are algebraic in nature. They're very logical thinking in nature. And so in our structured support lab, the required component for our students that need some learning support, we do a lot of things to support that course. Some of them begin with really some hands-on and very manipulative types of activities. It's also coupled with some algebraic instruction that's needed at certain points in statistics. I mean, statistics is not absent of algebraic thought. It's just not necessarily completely a college algebra-based thought. You do need to know a little bit about lines and regression and coordinate systems and different types of things you need in order to be successful in statistics. So those are the types of things that are addressed in the lab in a scaffolding nature. So it's very integrated. The lab activity is very integrated with the actual core course. So you start with the course and you figure out how to support that course for those students that need that assistance. Yes?
Do you have students that are required to have the mandatory support co-enrolled students that do not?
We do. We do. Yes.
How do they feel about that?
How does who?
The students. I'm sorry. The students. Do the students feel put on?
The students feel thrilled not to have 3 other math courses to take. So actually it's a positive thing for the students. If we compare it to what we used to do, we would have students not even have the opportunity to get to that course for really 3 semesters. And so they're thrilled to be in the course. We have the opposite happening. Some of our students who are not required to go to the structured learning lab want to go because they're seeing their colleagues have some benefits. And actually, some of our students in the structured lab are performing very well compared to the students that aren't in the structured lab. It is simply more time on task. It gives students a structured environment to work on concepts. Not only that, part of what we like to do is create some informal learning communities. A lot of times labs like this may be completely technology and computer based. Ours are not. In fact, the first couple of weeks we intentionally don't touch the computers because we want the students interacting with each other and forming cohesive learning groups and forming opportunities to interact and talk with each other. If they can talk with each other, they've got a support system. So while that may not be something that specifically addresses a developmental studies learning outcome, we know that that's something that's important for college success. Students need to have cohorts of like-minded learners, and this is a way that we can start that process.
Great, thanks, Loretta. Let's move on to Shauna. Shauna is sort of on the flip side of from Casey. Casey worked at the system office. Shauna is a faculty member at Front Range Community College, and so you were part of the process for designing the policy, but you actually have your own model that you've been implementing at Front Range in English and reading, getting students into gateway courses. So could tell us a little bit about what you do at Front Range.
Sure. We have integrated reading and writing, which was a paradigm shift. We had separate reading classes from developmental writing classes, and integrating those two, we felt at the state level was a really necessary step, but as you can imagine, it caused some heartburn. And now we have really highly contextualized courses within disciplines. So students are taking a gateway course while they're getting their reading and writing remediation. And so we have this cohort model. It develops social integration, social bonding, that sort of informal learning community effect. Students have more time with faculty members, and so we're finding deeper relationships there. And we're really seeing some pretty astounding results. And this is pretty new, but we're finding that students are taking greater credit loads in subsequent semesters than students who aren't in the cohort model. So that was sort of an unexpected result that we weren't necessarily looking for, but has happened. And we're finding that our students in the cohort models are outperforming the students that come in college ready. And not just by a little bit, but by a lot. And so it's sort of causing us to have that ethical conundrum of why aren't we providing this for all of our students? I think that we had been doing paired learning communities for a long time, and that sort of evolved now that we have this new statewide model. And so we're still contextualizing within the disciplines, psychology, history, sociology, literature, but we also are pairing this cohort model with college-level composition courses in addition.
So tell us a little bit more about sort of how reading instruction in particular is impacted by putting and teaching that instruction in the Gateway College course as opposed to a separate exercise. So what's different in terms of the reading instruction that's going on for those students?
Well, what we've really had to do is think about what kinds of reading and writing tasks are we asking of our students in a college course. And instead of teaching reading and writing in isolation, we're thinking about, well, how does a student read for biology? How is that different than how they read for math? How is that different than how they read for a literature course? And so what we found is that we were doing a really poor job of preparing students for those types of academic reading tasks. And so we're a lot more thoughtful about how we're designing that approach. And we found that by really contextualizing the reading process and the writing process within a discipline, we have a greater transference in other disciplines. And I know that sounds strange, it sounds kind of crazy, but if you teach a student how to read for a biology class and you teach them that it's different in biology than it may be in, say, psychology, they take those skills and they transfer them to their other discipline courses in a way that they weren't before when we were teaching reading as just reading and developmental writing as writing. We're teaching students to really think about purpose and audience in ways that we couldn't before, which has always been our goal. We've had to really train our faculty to think about reading as a process, just like they were thinking about writing as a process. There were a lot of turf wars, as you might imagine, reading teachers who felt like writing teachers were, that writing was just going to subsume reading and reading was going to cease to be important. And what we found is we've been really intentional about how we've created the curriculum so that reading and writing process are taught in tandem. And reading is not subsumed by the writing discipline. It's been a big learning curve for me. My background is rhetoric. I thought I knew how to teach reading, and I've learned a lot in this process that really I didn't know how to teach reading. Yeah.
Did you cross-train your faculty?
We do. We do cross-train the faculty. And we don't, like Loretta said, we no longer have developmental education and transfer education. We have reading and writing teachers who teach along the continuum, and everybody is trained. We have ongoing professional development, and we have a lot of part-time faculty. And so that was sort of a conundrum for us. How do we keep training people who are coming into the institution? We have a huge turnover rate every semester. And so we do have sort of ongoing professional cohorts, a lot of reflective practice groups. We're continually trying to learn from one another and create best practices.
Great. Thanks, Shauna. Let's move on to Heidi. Heidi, you've done two things at Boise State University. Is you've eliminated... I'm sorry, was there another question? I don't want to interrupt that. There's a question. Go ahead. Yes.
She wanted to know how we engage the students in engaging in the reading process. I think, the contextualization piece is key. Students need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that's what was missing before in our model, is it felt like it was an activity in isolation. It was just like their reading class. They didn't take those skills they were learning in their reading class and take it into their sociology class or their history class. And by contextualizing this process in a discipline, I think that we're showing students from the get-go the usefulness to them in that moment. Mm-hmm. We do. We've done... Yes, we've actually, and we're just starting this process, but we've done some focus groups with students to talk about their perceptions of their experience, because what we know is that student perception is a greater predictor of success than anything that they actually know academically, right? And students in our cohort models are feeling more competent. They feel like they have an advantage over students who aren't in the cohort model. And that confidence, I think, we're seeing that in the numbers with the greater credit loads in subsequent semesters.
Great. So let's move on to Heidi. And as I was mentioning, you've done two things. One is you've essentially eliminated prerequisite remediation in English, and also have redesigned how you're using assessment in order to be able to appropriately place students within the right gateway course, not a remedial course versus a gateway, but a gateway course. Talk a little bit about how you've been able to pull that off at Boise State.
Sure. So in Idaho, we actually had been working on these two issues of the idea of students should earn college-level credit for doing college-level work. That was one part of our argument starting in 2007 to our state board, because we had policies that prohibited us from giving students college-level credit for courses that also the state had defined as remedial and developmental. And these are words that are challenging and complex within the field of writing studies. These are contested terms, for sure. So we had been working on that issue at the same time that we had been working on trying to show again and again why cut score-based placement practices were problematic for writing instruction. We had national research that shows us this within the field. This is no surprise to anybody that works in composition and rhetoric that one test score does not hold any or very, very little predictive value for a student's performance in a writing course. So we had national research, we had local research, we had our own institutional research folks looking at it and saying, yeah, you're right. Students could flip a coin, and that would tell us as much about how they would do in their first-year writing course. So we had been, I was going to say agitating, but that's maybe too strong of a word. We had been in deep conversation and had task forces, and were doing pilot projects around these two areas of demonstrating why our what the state had called developmental courses were actually fully college-level courses, and demonstrating why our placement approach that was mandated at the state level was problematic. We'd have been engaged in this work for a long time before our state adapted the Complete College Idaho / America goals. So at Boise State, we used the opportunity to fully move to the model we wanted to move to anyway, which is a co-requisite model. Our model places or students take the course and then have a writer studio with their same instructor. At the same time, we've fully changed our placement on our local campus. Compass and Accuplacer are no longer part of the conversation, which is amazing and wonderful. And one of the results, so we designed our own online multiple measures placement tool. We actually call it course matching now. Students receive a course match. One of those matches could be with our co-requisite support model. I'm very comfortable placing some students into that model since they're receiving college level credit. And then the widest band of our students are matched with our first semester first year writing class, and we have a 2-semester sequence. So students complete this online process. It asks them to reflect on themselves as learners, but also enter their high school GPA, to read descriptions of the courses with the numbers removed and really try and imagine which course they'll benefit most from. So all of this work completely changes the conversation when it's not about sorting students, but it's about matching them with the course in which they're going to be most successful. We have some preliminary data too, but most exciting for us is the kind of sea change in how we're talking about these courses on our campus. Because even though we taught them as our developmental writing courses as kind of progressive, full writing courses, advisors didn't always talk about them in those ways with students. And now that advisors and all of our kind of various point people across campus have a better sense of what we're doing because we've had to articulate again and again about what these changes have meant, they talk with students differently and students understand our courses differently. So that's been...
So couple questions. One, I mean, Boise is a 4-year institution, but you've been able to have this happen at a community college as well, right? So talk a little bit about having that model, what you've developed, happen at the community college locally.
So Idaho is geographically dispersed, but we are a small state, and we have fewer institutions probably than you have even just in one of your systems. We have 8 institutions, 3 universities, 1 college, and then some community colleges and 1 technical college. All of our institutions, except for 1, have eliminated or are moving toward eliminating the non-credit-bearing kind of remedial model, and these words are hard for me to say I don't like them. So at our community college down the road from us, we've worked really closely and collaboratively through some state-supported work with those faculty and colleagues, and we often share the same faculty because we have part-time faculty working at both places. So they developed a 5-credit model, so English 101 with a 2-credit co-requisite model. I have some more specific preliminary data I can show you from that, but faculty and students there are ecstatic, and they got rid of 2 levels of pre-developmental writing. So they have no students, even at an open access community college. We're in Idaho. We are not especially well-funded for education, so I'm not pretending that we have better students than anywhere else in the country, but they're seeing great success with that model as well.
And then lastly, talk a little bit about, I think sort of the power of both the assessment model after eliminating remediation in terms of how it's empowering students and how it's sort of helping students sort of get a better handle on what's best for them rather than having somebody sort of dictate to them what kind of experience they have under the model that you've developed for assessment.
Right. So our model is called the right class, right? Like WRIT, of course. And the entire process, we really see it as from a student's very first contact with college, fostering habits of mind that we want them to have, like reflecting on who you are as a learner and thinking about what your life is going to be like in the semester that you're going to take your courses. We ask them to think about, are you the primary caregiver? Are you going to be working more than 20 hours? Are you living on campus? We ask them questions to help them try and imagine themselves project themselves into that college environment. So when students get their result at the end of this, it takes them 15 to 20 minutes maybe. I don't even think it takes that long for some of our students. Some students are placed into our co-requisite model. The largest band of our students are placed into English 101, the kind of the usual starting point, but then given information about the co-requisite model. And so this fall, we've had the happy problem of having more students that wanted to choose to be in the co-requisite model, and we didn't have enough space for them. So calling it language matters, right? So that's English 101 plus. Well, why wouldn't you want to be in something that's plus, that's extra? So it's become quickly, athletic advisors understand why it provides additional support and why it's productive and useful. Students get it. Students want to be in it. And so the whole idea that you're being matched with a course and you've seen a lot more information about it than you ever knew, because we have students who don't know what English 101 is. They assume they might study grammar or Shakespeare. They don't know. It gives us an opportunity to begin a dialogue with them about what their first semester experience will be like.
Great. Well, you'll get to hear from all these folks. You'll have some choices this afternoon to chat with them and learn more about what their specific models are. But what I want to do now is just sort of open it up for some conversation and discussion. I'd like to invite you all to ask questions, but I'm going to start it off with a question. Real quickly, whoever wants to respond would be great. One of the sort of common responses we get from folks in the field is co-requisite is great, but really for only those students who are just below the cut score. Maybe those who missed it by a point or two. Talk to me a bit about the range of students that are being supported in your models and why you think that this model can or cannot support students of a variety of skill levels. So I don't know who wants to jump in on that first. Loretta, why don't you?
I'll take it. I'll give it a shot. At my institution, we have a broad range of students. However, we do have a little bit of a bottom in terms of students who can enroll in the co-requisite course, and that was imposed upon us by our legislature. A student with a sub-ACT, we use ACT or corresponding compass for placement at this point. Students with a math sub-score of 14 or below are not on the university campuses. They're on the community college campuses. Prior to changing to this model, those students were in what we considered a remedial course, pre-algebra, arithmetic type of course. So we don't have the students with a sub-score below 14. All of our other students, all of the other sub-scores above that are on our campus. So for students with a sub-score above 14 but below 19, they go to our structured learning lab. They go to the required structured assistance. We see no difference in performance on ACT in that range, from the 15 up to the 19. We don't see a difference at all. So in terms of what's happening on our campus, we're not seeing a difference. We thought there would be a difference. We thought, well, clearly the students that are almost there, maybe the 18s, that maybe they don't need this or they're going to outperform, and that's simply not happening. It's very equally distributed in their performance in terms of what happens in their grades in their core class.
Shauna, at community college, tell us a little bit about that.
We're having a similar experience. We have a course designed specifically for students who, in our old model, would have come in 2 levels below college writing. And it's a 5-credit course. Students matriculate then into our college-level English course in the next semester. And there was a lot of concern about whether or not students were going to be ready. And one thing that we did to address that was something that we already knew was often students test into developmental coursework not because their skills are at a certain place, but because their lives are kind of at a certain place. And so we really felt it was important to address those affective concerns, and we have embedded student success courses in our embedded student success coaches in those courses. And so we have someone there who's available to help students if they need childcare, if their car broke down, if they have transportation problems, if they're struggling with finding resources. And we found that has been a huge component of getting those students through this course. It's a rigorous reading and writing course. Those students are more than prepared for college-level composition when they finish. And our initial data is showing us that those students are at least as successful as students coming into the college testing college ready. when they take English 121, which is our college level composition course.
And so, Casey, just one more to follow up. You're doing system-wide, so we're talking about all the community colleges. You've designed a system where all students have the opportunity to complete their gateway within one academic year, either one semester or potentially two. So tell me, what percentage of students do you expect you'll be able to serve under that model?
So we serve about 180,000 students a year system-wide. And the ones that I was thinking about as everyone else was talking is this group who we spent an extraordinary amount of time talking about in the policy arena. We're completely open access, and about 3% of our students come in, and they're not at that 9th grade level. And in fact, to the point where in some of our math classes, if you really ask math faculty, like, what's the content, what are you teaching? Well, 3rd to 5th grade basic quantitative reasoning skills. Well, we're not allowed to use financial aid for that. If you have a class that's not at least at the 9th grade level, developmental or not, students aren't allowed to use their financial aid awards for those particular things. And that's not happening statewide or nationally even. And sometimes I go to states and this revelation comes up about financial aid and people are floored. But we're asking students to use their financial aid awards that are not infinite on classes that won't transfer. And what we found is that we have adult basic education programs, and we have some of those learner prep, GED prep programs that are less expensive to run, that are really designed to do this. And our hearts were in the right place. We had created this sequence and backed into 3rd grade math somehow, thinking this was helpful. And really what we found that's more helpful is to connect people with the right community resources that they need to be able to get up to that 9th grade level and to start using their financial aid awards for things that were allowable. So that was hours, weeks, maybe even, of conversation to figure out how that was going to look, and it looks different at each of our 15 campuses in terms of implementation. But for me, that's the group that kind of sticks out as about 3% of those 180,000 students who really do need adult basic education services and skills.
And I think that's one of the things we're talking about in terms of changing the system for that lowest level students. And we all know that is a tough population, and there are no easy answers there. But at least creating a model where the threshold is at least getting them into a system like Colorado's, where they maybe with some support they can get into a situation where they'll know within one academic year that they can get through their gateway course in their program, is the best way to go, rather than sort of sentencing them to multiple semesters, tapping financial aid, drawing down to paying tuition, etc. Seems to make a lot of sense. So, are there any questions from the audience? Comments? Right over here. And then.
Hi, this question was for Shauna Van. You had mentioned that you are training faculty on how to understand the contextualized reading and writing process. What does that mean, training, and maybe an example of how that's happening?
So we offer 15 hours of training. We use Desire to Learn as our it's our web platform, and so part of the training is on D2L. And a lot of it is in the form of classroom observations and then reflective practice groups. And so anybody who comes in to teach our new redesign courses for us completes this training, and it's paid. So that's something that we really had to work out with our administration because it's not cheap. But what we found is it really does increase faculty engagement in the process, buy-in, and they feel like they have support. So we have leads for each of the courses who oversee that training piece and work with that cohort of faculty. And so it's kind of a combination: classroom observations, some work, reading some information on the D2L site, participating in discussions on that site, and then participating in reflective practice groups throughout the semester.
I have 3 quick yes/no questions. Heidi, are you willing to share that
Our placement.
Yeah, your placement.
Sure.
Awesome. Great. Heidi or Shauna, is your 5-credit course, your reading and writing course, is that college credit?
No. We are, no. That is, for the students coming in 2 levels below college readiness, that course does not, it counts towards their semester GPA. They're able to get financial aid for it, but it doesn't transfer.
Okay. And Bruce?
Yes.
Are you willing to share your PowerPoint?
We can absolutely let you
Awesome.
have access to that. That's great.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, all of the presentations today will be on a website for you. It's been created, so all the presentations will be available.
Great. Any other questions or comments at this point? Ooh, right over here, then right back there. So start here and then back there.
Yeah, my question is basically a cultural context, because we know that colleges and universities for hundreds of years have basically been an exclusive sorting model. So now you're talking about an inclusive success model. So tell me about, on your campus, what that cultural shift looks like.
That's a great question. Go ahead, Heidi.
So I think this is a really interesting question and conundrum for writing scholars. There's a strong tradition in our field from Mina Shaughnessy and other efforts to, in fact, basic writing courses were developed to support the very students we're talking about now. So I think it's also a mindset shift sometimes for some of us, or it was for me. But for us, when the data was so clear about how problematic what we were doing was, even with good intentions and with progressive, interesting, engaging pedagogy, even with a class that students liked, reported liking, still when the institutional structure sends the message that it doesn't count in some way, then students and parents hear that. And so shifting that to everything counts changes the conversation across campus. And Boise State is not an elite institution, and we filled the community college role until about 4 or 5 years ago when our community college opened. And so actually working with the very students we're talking about was a deep commitment of many of our faculty, and actually students that we didn't want to lose. And one of the reasons we were able to make the shift to our model was because of the fear that some state legislator someday would say that we couldn't do developmental work, and we wanted to keep and support those students in a 4-year environment if that's what they were choosing.
Follow up over here, and then we'll go back here.
I was just wondering what happened to the old programs that you had. Like, how did that kind of transition happen where, did they just fizzle, or,
Well, Casey might be able to answer this question better than I, because I can only speak for my institution. So Front Range is the largest community college in Colorado, and we have 3 campuses and 4 centers. So the culture was slightly different at each campus. And so at my campus in Fort Collins, we already had our basic writing and reading courses housed in the English department, and developmental math was in the math department. And so it wasn't a huge shift for us. Now, on our Westminster campus, it was awful because they had a developmental reading and writing department with a chair and a very distinct culture, and they're still trying to figure out what their identity is in this new. It was difficult for the faculty who identified themselves as transfer faculty, and it was really difficult for the faculty who identified as developmental faculty, because everybody feels like they're doing God's work, and no one wants to feel like they're and so it's been a paradigm shift, and it's been a process, and I wouldn't say that we're all the way there yet. But I think one of the benefits that I've seen at my college is a lot of folks who used to just sort of leave the fixing the students to the developmental faculty are now starting to participate more in taking care of our students. Because something that we've long known, those of us who teach developmental writing, those students are everywhere. They're in the psychology class, they're in the history class, they're already in these classes. And it's everybody's responsibility to help our students be successful at the institution. And so I think that's a benefit from this redesign, is it sort of brought attention to that.
Great. Did you want to say something, Casey?
Yeah, I would add that Shauna nailed it in terms of campus culture. When you look across the state, places where this was easier were places where administrators right away, early on, before we passed any policy, saw the direction of the conversation and said, we don't need a developmental math department and a math department. We need people to all be on the same page, and so let's start putting those structures in place early so that we can be on the same page. So campuses that were either proactive or that already had a structure where people in math taught math and that there weren't these divisions across lines, were able to transition, especially into co-requisites, much, much easier than places with distinct departments, because the reality was that where there were distinct departments, particularly we're in HLC as our accreditor in Colorado, and so HLC guidelines say that if you're teaching a college level class, and is Kentucky in SACS, so SACS is similar, that if you're teaching a transfer level class, faculty need to have that master's degree or a master's degree plus 18 graduate credit hours in the discipline area. So that's fine, except that in math in particular, one of the things we found with separate departments was that generally math departments required a math degree, and developmental math departments were okay with an educational math degree. So that means that people maybe came up through K-12 education and their course prefixes are EDU instead of MAT. This is really splitting hairs at this point, except that some institutions wouldn't allow a math education degree to continue teaching in math. And so that is an institutional decision, and as long as people are teaching at the developmental level, HLC doesn't care. But that was truly the biggest part of the culture shift. It depended on how an institution was structured in terms of how quickly they could adopt to what the redesign looked like.
Great. Back there. Thanks for waiting patiently. And then over here.
Heidi, my understanding was that you were saying that you've broken down the sequence in developmental writing classes, so it's not lower level and then upper level, but they're somehow divided differently. Is that right? In terms of student placement, that it's not, again, lower level students and then higher level? Or did I misunderstand that?
Maybe, or maybe I wasn't clear. Our standard sequence is what we call English 101 and 102, and we now have English 101 Plus. We no longer have English 90, which was our kind of developmental pre-credit course.
Okay, so you don't have any developmental?
No, and neither does the community college that I'll be talking a little bit about.
Over here, and then over here.
I just have a really quick question about, and any of y'all could speak to it, about online instruction. More and more of our developmental students are electing to take their courses online, and I'm curious how this would play out with gateway courses if these students needed that co-requisite support. I'm just wondering how you all are dealing with that. Thank you.
Yep, we do that.
I'm sorry,
Go
Casey.
ahead, Shauna.
I'm like so excited about what we're doing with online right now. In fact, in some ways, I think because we were so concerned about that, how we were going to serve those students, that we really put a lot of thought into how we're implementing online, and it's been remarkable. And in fact, attrition online is notoriously, it's just horrible. And we're finding that we're retaining those students in our CC, our Studio 121. That's the course where our students are correct with additional support in their college level composition course. We're retaining those students at a higher rate than the students who are taking online courses college ready. That's pretty amazing, because traditionally developmental was poor. We're using a lot of screencasting. We're using a lot of different technologies to sort of connect students and teachers and students with other students online. We're finding that's really important, that kind of face-to-face contact.
We decided from the beginning of our English 101 move that we would do them only through on-campus, face-to-face sections. And so we do not have online sections of that. And I don't see it yet in the foreseeable future. We do offer a small number of online sections of our first-year writing courses, but we felt like this experience was so much about building community and about building connections to campus that that's the model that we're using so far.
Great. Over here.
Back to credentialing. I have a question about the English 101 Plus. What type of credentialing do you require for that one, and also for integrated reading writing? How are you dealing with the fact that some people who are teaching might be from English background and some of them would be from reading background? How do you deal with the credentialing?
So are you asking how people are teaching these courses now, or which faculty we have teaching these courses? Okay. Well, as Casey alluded to before, we've traditionally hired faculty in the English department who have degrees in English. We have a few faculty at our college who have degrees, master's degrees in reading. And what we decided was, if reading and writing are equally important, and if we're all going to be in this together, we're not going to differentiate between who can do what. And so that's sort of how we solve that problem. So our faculty with reading masters and our faculty with writing masters are all teaching these CCR courses and freshman composition courses as well.
So I mentioned that our campus has a strong commitment to what formerly was called developmental writing. We have Karen Euling on our campus, who was one of the early presidents of the Conference on Basic Writing. And so English 90 was already in our department and was well respected, and the instructors of the course were well respected and supported. And so it's those same faculty who then went through a year of workshops and teamwork together to say, what does this mean in an English 101 P in a co-requisite model. So it was that same faculty that are now teaching this new course.
Great. Back there. Then
Hi. My question is for Loretta about the structured labs. What incentive is there for the students to attend the structured labs? Are you finding that they're actually attending, and is that a part of the grade, or is there an attendance requirement for those?
That's an excellent question, and we spent weeks and weeks and weeks debating and fussing about what this would look like. It is a mandatory lab. I'll tell you where we landed. If a student if a student misses their mandatory lab, they can miss up to 2 times. The 3rd time they miss the lab, they receive an F in the course. So that's a pretty stout requirement, and I will. Later on, I'll tell you a little bit more about that in our afternoon session if you're interested. I was opposed to that on the front end. After watching it happen, I'm not opposed to it at all. And I was almost belligerently opposed, honestly. So
Loretta, you're belligerent? I can never imagine.
Yeah. Well, I as the faculty member teaching the core course, I wanted to own my grade book, and I was of the philosophy of how dare somebody tell me what I have to put in that grade book. But it's okay. It's turned out it's totally fine.
So over here, and then I think we have maybe time for a couple more questions after that, then we'll have to wrap it up.
I'm curious about ESL with the immigrant, refugee, international population. Do you integrate them in, or do you do something separate, or how do you guys, how do you deal with that?
So it might surprise you that Boise, Idaho has a large refugee population. We're a resettlement city. And at the same time at Boise State, another population that we still feel like we're struggling to serve really well are our international students. Most of ours come from the Middle East and have, so right now our students that come in on an international student visa, because they're more visible, they're a population we can target differently. We do have a separate elective credit-bearing course that they take prior to taking English 101, and then they could either take 101 or 101P. That model is very much up in the air, and we're doing some kind of testing of different ways of doing it in the spring. We don't feel like we're serving our multilingual population especially well yet, and our refugee students often are very hard for us to find and support well. And so they would be, if they have a U.S. high school diploma of any kind, then they're kind of mainstreamed and surprisingly challenging for us to identify and better support. So it's a concern we have, and I don't think we have an answer. So hopefully the others do, and then I can write notes and be done.
I also don't have a very good answer, but we're grappling with the same thing. And one thing that we've done as a solution is we're offering a sheltered section of one of our courses that has an ESL teacher teaching it. Any student can enroll in that section because we're not allowed to keep anyone out, but that's where advisors recommend our international students go and our second language learners go. She's done an amazing job with that group. We've also added specific ESL hours in the Writing Center so that students who are in any of our writing courses can meet with a tutor who has a second language learner pedagogy that understands how to best help those students. And we're going to continue sort of exploring that because it's an issue we really can't ignore. They're not developmental students. It's a very different approach. And we need to have teachers who understand how to work with those students. And actually, one of the things that we've considered doing is including in our training some ESL components because it's a reality for a lot of our students.
And I think Shauna's answer speaks to the diversity in the state. So at her campus, it's not realistic to say we're going to have this huge ESL program, and so ESL students are put into developmental classes. We have 2 campuses where we have more than 30 languages represented on campus, and so a standard part of what that looks like at those 2 places is that we talk to students and find out, oh, they're ESL students, and that ESL is really more appropriate for them than developmental education. These aren't necessarily people who have developmental education needs. Potentially, they were excellent students in their home countries, and what they need is to learn how to speak English, and that's a very different skill set than what we're teaching in our developmental classes. And so the entire process at those places is really different for ESL students because we have entire programs geared towards learning to speak English as opposed to basic quantitative reasoning skills. So the content even is different depending on where students are. It depends on what their language needs are. And so sometimes, sure, you're enrolled in other things, absolutely, and you could do co-requisite learning experiences and it's more contextualized, but for people who have really tremendous language needs, that it's about being in an intensive ESL environment and it's about learning English before we start trying to put you into a college composition class because that doesn't make sense yet.
Okay, what over here?
Hi, this semester we have gone full scale with implementing the ALP for writing and for reading, and we're working on the math, but we are still running into the conversations of, with some of the gen ed faculty, the fear of you're going to water down the curriculum. So what advice could you give to us to help those conversations on our campus about this model is good, and just how did you guys break through that barrier with those conversations? It's kind of sometimes creating a rift in those 2 populations. So if you could give us one piece of advice to move this forward, we'd appreciate it.
I don't have one piece of advice.
I was hoping for a real simple answer.
I just had this conversation. We're still having these conversations, but I just had this conversation on Wednesday of this week with a Writing Center tutor who said, now with these new easier courses, we're seeing more and more. And I feel something fry behind my eyeballs, and I just have to smile and say, tell me more about these easier courses, because she doesn't teach them. She's not in the classroom. So I really encouraged her to come and sit in on some of these redesigned courses. They're far more rigorous than what we were doing before. And what we're finding is students are excited by that. They're initially terrified, but it causes them to engage at a higher level because they want to be successful, and they don't feel patronized, and they have been feeling patronized their whole lives, and the last thing we want is for them to feel that when they come to college. I think the best solution is to have people actually attend the classes and see what you're doing in there and see how you're working with the students. But it's a really difficult issue to address because the myth persists.
So I'm a psychology faculty member, and I think for me, that Shauna helped actually convince me that teaching writing is also my responsibility. And I think the other part of that conversation for my colleagues has been, first of all, you can't tell the difference in your class of someone who tested into developmental education and who didn't. They look the same. They write the same. They're equally as bad or equally as good, just as much as throwing spaghetti against the wall. You cannot tell the difference. And I think the other component that's helped at least my colleagues is to think through what were our expectations of students coming out of developmental education, and that it's impossible to think that 1 semester, 2 semesters, or 4 semesters of coursework that's geared towards getting people ready to pass a college-level English class is going to make an impact on how they're writing in my psychology class, because the skills are different. I don't even want them to use MLA when they're writing for my psychology class. And so even just my baseline of discipline expectations is different. And so I think the conversation that needs to happen across the disciplines is that, yes, in fact, that teaching writing is everyone's responsibility. And what do you think that developmental faculty are doing? Waving a magic wand and just making people college ready? Because that's not our reality. And helping people from conversation to conversation understand that that's part, what do they think students are getting? And not that this is any different or that needs to change the conversation, because the old paradigm or new paradigm, you're still not magically preparing students to be great students. That's not what the content is in these classes.
So we're at time, so let's just do one last quick question and quick question, quick answers, okay?
This is a general question, although my interest is in mathematics in particular. But I've heard this theme of having to sort of reassess what we expect, what we think students need to know in getting students into this gateway course that's most appropriate for their major. In doing so, in particular mathematics, I'm curious, have the learning outcomes that were in the old system in development, have they been retained or abandoned? And this may apply to English as well, if they've been retained, then do we have data showing how well students do under one system compared to how they did under the other system? On the other hand, if they've been abandoned, I'm curious as to how this philosophy might extend to saying maybe an art major doesn't need to take history, and maybe a science major doesn't need to take anything, a philosophy class. How this might extend to general education overall.
So on our campus, previously, the old structure of developmental education was specifically built with the college algebra for all mindset. Our campus no longer had that mindset. So the outcomes that we previously had for developmental studies did not apply to our campus. So yes, we in fact developed an entire new comprehensive university-wide, what do we want our students to know? Had to pay a lot of attention in the mathematics courses to identify very rigorous mathematical topics that still continued to meet all of the accrediting agencies and all of the different constituencies that were impossible to try to make happen. We actually did it. It took a lot of time. Almost an impossible task, but not completely impossible. Taking old student learning outcomes and applying them to something that was no longer a standard did not seem reasonable to us. So it was an entire redevelopment, rethinking process.
Yeah, I think that's the critical point, is that when we're talking about changing the curriculum, it's about what is it necessary for students to succeed in their program of study. You're back mapping all the way through. And so at the end of the day, the questions of rigor are all about what does it take for students to be successful in their program, as opposed to some sort of arbitrary standard of what all students should know. And what they can do to be successful. So I think the results we've seen, generally speaking, are students are proceeding and progressing through their programs of study when it's implemented in the right way.
I also think there was a question earlier about campus culture and how we change our thinking. It used to be in a lot of areas that college algebra was the gateway course. That was what stopped students, not empowered students. And I no longer want mathematics to be used for that reason. I think mathematics should be empowering, not the thing that prevents people from reaching their goals. So it is a way, your campus has to think differently. You do have to restructure your mindset.
And with that, we'll have that be the final word. Thank you so much, Loretta. And thank you, everyone, the panel.